The quantum transponder in the Stellar Senate's central monitoring chamber shrieked with an alarm that hadn't been heard in 3 centuries. Senior Sensor Coordinator Zernak of the Luminescent Collective felt his crystalline body vibrate with an emotion most closely resembling human terror. The incoming vessel's signature defied every known principle of spaceflight. No approach vector. No standard communication protocols. No preliminary identification beacon. Just presence. A massive metallic construct that seemed to slice through the fabric of space-time like a knife through water, leaving impossible geometries in its wake. Impossible, muttered Ambassador Galera of the Vornax delegation, her tentacular appendages coiling with nervous energy. No sublight drive could traverse that distance. No quantum tunnel could maintain structural integrity. Captain Maya Chen stood motionless on the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound, her augmented neural interface crackling with a symphony of data streams that would have overwhelmed any non-human consciousness. To her, the complex web of information was as natural as breathing. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering that bordered on the mystical. Constructed from a hybrid metamaterial that existed somewhere between matter and energy, its hull seemed to shimmer and shift, absorbing and redirecting incoming sensor data with casual elegance. Traditional scanning methods simply slid off its surface like water on treated glass. "Sensor lock?" Chen asked, her voice calm. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez chuckled. "Negative. We're completely invisible." "Well, invisible isn't quite right. We're more contextually irrelevant." The bridge crew, a diverse ensemble of humans who represented humanity's most advanced genetic and technological augmentation program, moved with a synchronicity that suggested something beyond standard military training. Each member seemed to anticipate the other's movements, their neural links creating a living, breathing computational network. In the Stellar Senate chamber, panic began to spread. "Where did they come from?" demanded Ambassador Kralk of the Mrelic Confederation, his multiple eyes spinning in agitated patterns. "No diplomatic communication. No standard approach vectors. This is a violation of every established first contact protocol." Senior Diplomatic Coordinator Liana, one of the few voices of relative calm, studied the holographic displays with clinical precision. The human vessel's approach defied every known principle of interstellar navigation. It wasn't just that it had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, it was how it had appeared. Space itself seemed to fold around the vessel, creating impossible geometries that made seasoned astronomers question their understanding of physics. The ship didn't so much travel through space as suggest the irrelevance of spatial constraints. On the Prometheus Unbound, Captain Chen allowed herself the slightest smile. "Initiating first contact protocol," she announced. But her version of first contact was nothing like anything the Stellar Senate had ever experienced. The ship's quantum communication arrays began to pulse, not with standard linguistic or mathematical signals, but with something far more complex, a communication matrix that was part data, part art, part pure mathematical poetry. It wasn't a message so much as a multidimensional statement of existence. The Senate's communication systems began to break down. Quantum transponders flickered. Holographic displays warped and twisted. For a brief moment, every sensor in the central chamber displayed fragments of human culture, bursts of music, complex mathematical equations, artistic representations that seemed to move and breathe with their own internal logic. It was a hack, but it was also an introduction. "We are here," the transmission seemed to say, "and we are nothing like what you expected." Ambassador Liana felt a chill run through her diplomatic exoskeleton. This was no ordinary first contact. This was a fundamental challenge to everything the Stellar Senate understood about interstellar communication, technological development, and the very nature of intelligent life. The Prometheus Unbound hung in space, or rather, suggested its presence in space, waiting. Not aggressively, not defensively. Simply existing, a statement more powerful than any weapon, more intricate than any diplomatic missive. Humanity had arrived. and nothing would ever be the same. The emergency Senate hearing chamber fell into a horrified silence as Dr. Alejandro Reyes stepped forward. His presentation was nothing short of a biological declaration of war against everything the galactic scientific community believed they understood about life. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary entities of the Stellar Senate, Reyes began, his voice calm and almost clinical. What I'm about to demonstrate will fundamentally challenge your understanding of biological adaptation. Behind him, a group of 5 humans stood motionless. They were dressed in simple white biosuits, their only distinguishing features the neural interface nodes subtly embedded along their spinal columns. To the alien delegates, they looked unremarkable, disappointingly ordinary. That was about to change. Dr. Rice activated the first holographic display. It showed a molecular breakdown of human genetic structure, but this was no ordinary genetic map. Alien geneticists leaned forward, their sensory appendages twitching with increasing agitation. Our genetic code, Rice explained, is not just a blueprint. It's a living, adaptive quantum algorithm. The first demonstration began with an environment simulator that materialized in the center of the chamber. Instantly, the room transformed into a simulation of Kepler-16 bits, a planet with atmospheric conditions that would kill most known biological entities within seconds. Toxic chemical composition, extreme radiation levels, crushing atmospheric pressure, temperatures that fluctuated between absolute zero and molten rock. The 5 human test subjects stepped forward. Where any other known species would have been instantly vaporized, these humans began to change. Their skin shifted, developing microscopic structures that instantaneously filtered toxic gases. Dermal layers reconfigured, creating living radiation shields. Muscular and skeletal systems compressed and expanded, adapting to the extreme pressure. It wasn't genetic modification. It was something far more terrifying. The Vornax delegation's lead scientist, Dr. Clarix, could barely process what he was witnessing. "This is impossible," he stammered. "Genetic adaptation occurs over generations. This is instantaneous quantum reorganization." Rives smiled. Precisely. The next demonstration was even more shocking. Another environmental simulation materialized. This time, the interior of a neutron star, conditions so extreme that matter itself broke down at the atomic level. The human test subjects not only survived but began to thrive. Their bodies became something between matter and energy, their cellular structures dancing with a complexity that made the most advanced alien nanotechnology look like children's building blocks. Our genetic code, Rice continued, is a quantum computational system. It doesn't just adapt, it predicts. It transforms. It exists in multiple potential states simultaneously. Senior genetic researcher Jera of the Luminescent Collective felt her entire understanding of biology collapsing. These humans weren't just another species. They were a living, breathing quantum computation system that happened to look humanoid. The final demonstration pushed the Senate into complete disbelief. The human test subjects were exposed to a series of extreme scenarios: vacuum of space, nuclear radiation, chemical warfare agents, psychic disruption fields that would obliterate the neural networks of most telepathic species. With each challenge, their bodies and minds reconfigured, adapted, and overcame. But it was more than physical adaptation. The neural interfaces revealed something even more terrifying. Their consciousness was adapting, learning, growing. The very act of experiencing these extreme conditions was being instantaneously integrated into their genetic memory, creating a collective learning system that was nothing short of evolutionary magic. Dr. Rice made his final point with surgical precision. "Humanity is not a species," he said, his voice echoing through the stunned chamber. "We are a living, adaptive computational system. Our genetics are an open-source algorithm that continuously rewrites itself in real time." The implications were earth-shattering. If humans could adapt this quickly, this completely, they weren't just another civilization. They were a fundamental force of nature. The Stellar Senate had expected a new species. Instead, they had discovered a living, breathing evolutionary algorithm that defied every known principle of biological development. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of life itself, and they were just getting started. The Universal Economic Forum had always been a carefully choreographed dance of established galactic powers. For millennia, the Consortium of Unified Mercantile Worlds had maintained an iron grip on interstellar trade, their intricate web of economic regulations suffocating innovation and maintaining a delicate balance of power. Trade Minister Elena Volkov walked into the forum like a quantum storm. Her delegation was unlike any the forum had seen before. No elaborate diplomatic entourage, no traditional trade representations. Just her, a holographic interface, and a team of economic analysts whose eyes seemed to burn with an almost predatory intelligence. The forum's primary chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, a massive spherical space where holographic trade routes and economic projections danced in three-dimensional complexity. Representational avatars of a dozen major economic powers floated around central negotiation platforms, their computational interfaces humming with centuries of accumulated trade algorithms. Volkov's first move was deceptively simple. "We're here to discuss a comprehensive restructuring of the current trade paradigm," she announced, her voice cutting through the chamber's ambient noise like a precision laser. The Krellnax Trade Coordinator, a massive crystalline entity that represented the most powerful economic bloc in 3 galactic sectors, immediately responded. Its computational avatar expanded, filling the chamber with a complex web of existing trade agreements, tariff structures, and economic barriers that had remained unchanged for over 3 centuries. "Impossible," the avatar proclaimed. "The current trade structure is mathematically optimized. Any significant change would cause catastrophic economic destabilization." Elena Volkov smiled. With a single gesture, her holographic interface began to deconstruct the Krellnax trade model. It wasn't just an analysis. It was a complete algorithmic dismantling. Lines of trade routes she proposed weren't just alternative pathways. They were entirely new economic dimensions that made the existing models look like primitive accounting ledgers. What made her approach revolutionary was its fundamental philosophy. Where previous galactic economic models relied on rigid control and managed scarcity, Volkov's proposal introduced a concept of adaptive economic ecosystems, trade routes that could dynamically reconfigure, resource allocation algorithms that learned and evolved in real time. The Mrelic economic adjudicator watched in growing horror as Volkov's proposal began to ripple through the forum's computational networks. It wasn't just a trade proposal. It was an economic virus that was rewriting foundational economic principles. 3 major trade monopolies collapsed within the first hour of her presentation. The Vornax Merchant Guild, which had controlled interstellar resource distribution for over 6 centuries, found its carefully constructed economic barriers dissolving like sugar in water. Volkov's approach didn't just challenge their monopoly. It rendered their entire economic model obsolete. What made her strategy truly terrifying was its unpredictability. Traditional economic warfare involved complex mathematical models, diplomatic pressure, and carefully managed resource constraints. Volkov's approach was something else entirely. It was part economic theory, part quantum computational art, and part something that defied traditional classification. She wasn't just proposing new trade routes. She was reimagining the very concept of economic exchange. Resource allocation became dynamic and self-organizing. Trade barriers transformed into adaptive membranes that could reconfigure based on real-time global economic needs. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic economics for millennia began to crumble. The luminescent collective's chief economic advisor could only watch in stunned silence as entire economic ecosystems were born, evolved, and transformed in moments. "This isn't just a trade proposal," the advisor whispered to a colleague. "This is economic evolution in real time." By the end of her presentation, Volkov had done the impossible. She had not just proposed a new economic model. She had demonstrated that the entire concept of controlled economic systems was an outdated illusion. 3 major economic empires had fallen. A dozen new economic paradigms had emerged. And humanity had shown that their most powerful weapon wasn't technology or military might. It was the ability to look at an established system and imagine something completely different. The Universal Economic Forum would never be the same again. The Krell-Nax War Armada represented the most terrifying military force in galactic history. 17,000 warships, each the size of a small moon, equipped with quantum disruptor cannons capable of shattering planetary cores. They had systematically conquered or eliminated 32 advanced civilizations over the past millennium. Their invasion of human-controlled space was meant to be a surgical strike, a demonstration of absolute military superiority. Major Marcus Wong watched their approach from the command bridge of the adaptive defense platform, Prometheus Shield. Unlike traditional military vessels, this wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a living, thinking defensive ecosystem that existed somewhere between technological infrastructure and sentient strategy. The Krell-Nax fleet's initial assault followed their standard invasion protocol, a mathematically perfect first wave designed to overwhelm and destroy. 17,000 ships moving with computational precision, quantum disruptor cannons charging, prepared to reduce human colonies to atomic dust. They never saw the real threat coming. The first indication something was wrong came when the initial wave of quantum disruptor energy simply disappeared. Not deflected, not absorbed, simply ceased to exist, as if the very fabric of space-time had forgotten the attack ever happened. Adaptive quantum interference field activated, announced Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, her neural interface crackling with a complex web of predictive algorithms. Incoming energy signatures being transformed into computational data streams. The Krell-Nax fleet commanders watched in growing horror as their most devastating weapons were being systematically converted into information. Each weapon discharge didn't just fail, it became part of the human defensive strategy. Major Wong's strategy was nothing short of biological warfare against military logic itself. The Prometheus Shield wasn't a traditional defensive platform. It was a living computational organism that learned and adapted with each microsecond of conflict. Traditional military doctrine relied on preset strategies and predetermined response protocols. Human defensive systems did something far more terrifying. They evolved in real time. Swarms of adaptive drone networks began to emerge from the defensive platform. They weren't just autonomous weapons. They were a distributed intelligence that could reconfigure themselves instantaneously. Where a traditional military would send specialized units for specific tasks, these drones became whatever the strategic moment required. A squadron of fighters would suddenly transform into a network of quantum communication relays. Defensive shields would reshape themselves into offensive computational weapons. The very concept of weapon became fluid, dynamic, impossible to predict. The Krell-Nax fleet's computational war minds began to break down. Their invasion strategies, perfected over millennia of galactic conquest, encountered an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable pattern of conflict. "They're not fighting," whispered the Krell-Nax fleet commander, its multiple consciousness centers struggling to process what was happening. "They're learning." Each Krell-Nax attack was instantaneously analyzed, understood, and transformed into a defensive strategy. It wasn't just defense. It was a form of aggressive adaptation that turned the entire concept of warfare into a living, breathing computational art form. The human defensive system didn't just predict enemy movements. It seemed to exist in multiple potential conflict states simultaneously, rendering traditional military strategy obsolete. Within 3 standard galactic hours, the 17,000 Krell-Nax warships had been completely neutralized, not destroyed, not defeated in any traditional sense, simply rendered irrelevant. Major Wong's final communication to the Krell-Nax fleet was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Conflict is obsolete. Adaptation is the only true strategy. The surviving Krellnack ships retreated, their computational war minds struggling to process an encounter that defied every principle of military engagement they had ever understood. Humanity hadn't just won a battle. They had demonstrated that the very concept of warfare was ready for a fundamental reimagining. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Dr. Aria Chen stood at the center of the Galactic Cultural Preservation Forum, her violin balanced delicately between her shoulder and chin. Around her, representatives from 1,000 different civilizations watched with a mixture of anticipation and growing unease. This was no ordinary musical performance. The venue itself was a marvel of architectural design, a massive spherical chamber that could simultaneously translate and interpret cultural expressions across multiple sensory and cognitive spectrums. Designed to be the ultimate platform for interstellar cultural exchange, it had hosted millions of performances over centuries. None had been like this. As Aria's bow touched the strings, something extraordinary happened. The music wasn't just sound. It was a multidimensional experience that transcended traditional sensory perception. For the telepathic luminars, the music became a cascade of complex emotional landscapes. Crystalline species experienced it as intricate geometric patterns of light and resonance. The silicon-based Krellnacks found themselves processing emotional algorithms they didn't even know existed within their computational matrices. Each listener experienced the performance differently, yet simultaneously. A Mrelic diplomatic attaché suddenly found herself weeping, a biological response impossible for her species. Her neural pathways were being rewritten by frequencies that spoke directly to something beyond language, beyond biology. The Vornax delegation's sensory interfaces began to malfunction. What they were experiencing wasn't just music. It was a form of communication so complex, so nuanced, that it temporarily short-circuited their entire communication network. Dr. Chen wasn't just playing a violin. She was conducting a symphony of cognitive disruption. Embedded within the music were layers of information, mathematical theorems, emotional landscapes, cultural memory, quantum computational patterns. It was art as a form of total communication, a cultural weapon more sophisticated than any military strategy. The forum's translation systems collapsed under the complexity. Traditional interpretation became impossible. Instead, listeners were experiencing something far more profound, a direct neural and emotional communication that bypassed all established linguistic barriers. "This isn't a performance," whispered Dr. Korix, the senior xenocultural researcher. "This is a complete cognitive invasion. Humanity's most potent weapon wasn't technology. It was creativity." As the performance continued, galactic communication networks began to transform. The music spread, not through traditional transmission, but through a kind of quantum cultural entanglement that defied traditional understanding of information transfer. Entire planetary cultures found themselves simultaneously experiencing a fundamental shift in perception. Art galleries on distant worlds began displaying works that seemed to emerge from nowhere, complex pieces that captured the essence of the human performance. Musical traditions began to evolve, incorporating elements that couldn't be explained through traditional cultural transmission. It was cultural evolution in real time. The Stellar Senate's communication monitoring systems went into complete disarray. What they were witnessing wasn't just a cultural exchange. It was a form of cognitive colonization that happened through pure creative expression. Dr. Chen finished her performance. The chamber remained silent. Then, slowly, the representatives began to understand. This wasn't just music. This was a complete reimagining of cultural communication. Humanity had just demonstrated that art could be a form of total communication, a way of sharing experience that transcended language, biology, and technological limitation. The most terrifying part for the alien delegations wasn't the performance itself. It was the realization that this was just the beginning. Humanity didn't need traditional weapons of conquest. They could reshape entire civilizations through creativity, emotional depth, and a form of communication so advanced it bordered on the mystical. As Dr. Chen stepped off the stage, The Galactic Cultural Preservation Forum knew nothing would ever be the same again. Culture had become humanity's most powerful form of diplomacy, and the galaxy was about to be transformed. The International Quantum Research Symposium had always been a carefully controlled affair. For centuries, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations would gather to present incremental technological advances, minor improvements that might shift scientific understanding by microscopic degrees. Dr. Kamara O'Keefe was about to detonate a scientific nuclear bomb. The presentation hall was a marvel of architectural design, a spherical chamber that could simultaneously translate and interpret scientific concepts across multiple cognitive spectrums. Holographic displays danced with complex mathematical models, representing the accumulated scientific knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. When Dr. O'Keefe activated her presentation, the entire chamber went silent. The Quantum Adaptive Resonance Drive, QARD, wasn't just another technological innovation. It was a fundamental reimagining of the relationship between matter, energy, and dimensional constraints. What we've developed, Dr. O'Keefe began, her voice calm and measured, is not a propulsion system. It's a reality navigation protocol. The holographic display began to shift in ways that defied conventional understanding. Where traditional faster-than-light travel models showed linear movement through spacetime, the QARD demonstration revealed something far more complex. It wasn't moving through space. It was rewriting the very concept of spatial existence. Dr. Clarix, the senior scientific advisor from the Vornax Research Collective, felt his multiple sensory organs begin to overload. What he was witnessing challenged every fundamental principle of physics he had studied for centuries. The QARD prototype didn't just move. It existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. One moment, the holographic representation showed the device in orbit around a distant star. The next, it was traversing the event horizon of a black hole. Then, impossibly, it was existing in 3 different locations at once, not as a projection, but as a verifiable scientific reality. Traditional faster-than-light travel, Dr. O'Keefe continued, assumes movement through space. We've discovered that space itself is a negotiable construct. The demonstration went beyond mere technological presentation. It was a live deconstruction of everything the scientific community believed about the nature of reality. The Luminescent Collective's quantum research team watched in growing horror and fascination. Their most advanced computational models, developed over millennia of scientific research, were being rendered obsolete in real time. Dr. O'Keefe wasn't just presenting a new technology. She was offering a complete philosophical reconstruction of scientific understanding. The QARD prototype began to demonstrate capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. It could instantaneously communicate across galactic distances. It could exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. More terrifyingly, it could manipulate the fundamental constants of physical reality. We're not just traveling through space, Dr. O'Keefe explained. We're having a conversation with the fundamental fabric of reality itself. The symposium's translation systems began to break down. The complexity of the scientific concepts being presented defied traditional linguistic interpretation. Entire scientific paradigms were collapsing in real time. The most shocking moment came when Dr. O'Keefe demonstrated the drive's ability to create temporary dimensional bridges. For a brief, impossible moment, the symposium chamber existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Scientific delegates from different species experienced the same moment from completely different perceptual frameworks. Dr. Clarix could only whisper one word: impossible. Dr. O'Keefe smiled. Impossible is just a failure of imagination. The final demonstration pushed the boundaries of scientific understanding completely. The QARD prototype began to interact with the fundamental quantum information that composed reality itself. It wasn't just manipulating spacetime. It was engaging in a complex dialogue with the very building blocks of existence. As the presentation concluded, the scientific community understood something profound. Humanity wasn't just another technological civilization. They were architects of reality itself. The Stellar Senate's Scientific Advisory Board would never be the same. Technological development was no longer about incremental improvement. It was about reimagining the very nature of existence. And humanity was just getting started. The void singularity appeared without warning, a cosmic phenomenon that had systematically devoured entire galactic civilizations. It consumed not just matter and energy, but the very fundamental information that comprised existence. 17 advanced civilizations had already been erased from reality, not just destroyed, but completely unwritten, as if they had never existed. Captain Maya Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound, her neural interfaces burning with a complex web of computational possibilities. This wasn't just a military mission. This was humanity's most audacious challenge yet. The Stellar Senate's collective scientific and military might had already failed. Traditional defensive strategies, computational models, and weapons technologies had been rendered completely ineffective against the void singularity. It consumed entire star systems in microseconds, leaving behind nothing, not even the memory of existence. Quantum resonance patterns stabilizing, announced Dr. Alejandro Reyes, his genetic augmentations allowing him to process information at speeds that would liquefy a normal human brain. Initial dimensional breach protocols are online. What made humanity's approach different was its fundamental philosophy of engagement, where other civilizations saw the void singularity as a threat to be destroyed. Humans saw it as a complex system to be understood, communicated with, and ultimately transformed. The Prometheus Unbound wasn't a traditional warship. It was a living computational organism, part technological infrastructure, part adaptive biological system, part quantum information network. Every system was designed to learn, adapt, and reimagine itself in real time. Initiating Dimensional Communication Protocol, Captain Chen announced. The ship began to do something no military vessel had ever attempted. Instead of preparing for combat, it started to generate a complex quantum communication matrix that would interface directly with the fundamental information structure of the void singularity. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the mission's lead xenophysicist, monitored the initial contact. "It's not a weapon," she explained to the stunned Stellar Senate observation team. "It's a conversation." The void singularity represented something beyond traditional understanding. It wasn't just consuming matter and energy. It was systematically unwriting the fundamental information codes that gave reality its structure. Traditional defensive strategies were like trying to stop an ocean with a paper fan. Humanity's approach was radically different. The Prometheus Unbound began to generate a quantum communication pattern that was part mathematical theorem, part emotional landscape, part pure computational poetry. It wasn't trying to fight the void singularity. It was attempting to understand its fundamental nature. As the communication matrix expanded, something extraordinary began to happen. The void singularity, for the first time in its known existence, stopped consuming. It began to interact. "We're establishing a communication baseline," Dr. Rodriguez reported, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and existential wonder. "It's responding to our information patterns." The ship's adaptive systems were doing something unprecedented. They were translating the void singularity's fundamental information structure into a comprehensible format. More importantly, they were offering an alternative narrative of existence. Where the singularity saw destruction as its primary function, the human communication matrix began to introduce concepts of creation, adaptation, and potential. The Stellar Senate observation team watched in stunned silence. Captain Chen's final communication was a masterpiece of interdimensional diplomacy. Destruction is a failure of imagination. There are other ways to exist. For 3 impossible moments, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The void singularity began to change. Its fundamental information structure started to reconfigure. What had been a force of pure consumption was being rewritten into something else, something that contained the potential for creation, for understanding, for growth. It wasn't a battle. It was a conversation. And humanity had just changed the fundamental nature of a cosmic threat. The Stellar Senate would later debate whether this was a military victory, a scientific breakthrough, or something entirely beyond their comprehension. But in that moment, humanity had done what no civilization had ever achieved. They had looked into the absolute void and offered it a different way of existing. The final Senate session would be remembered as the moment everything changed. Ambassador Kira Nerov stood at the center of the grand circular chamber, a space that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for millennia. Behind her, holographic representations flickered with the collective history of 1,000 worlds. The air itself seemed charged with an anticipation that bordered on existential revolution. "We are not here to conquer," she began, her voice cutting through the chamber's ambient noise like a precision laser. "We are here to transform." The chamber fell silent. Representatives from civilizations that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years listened with a mixture of terror and fascination. The revelations of the past months had systematically dismantled every established understanding of intelligence, potential, and existence. Humanity had not just arrived on the galactic stage. They had rewritten the very concept of what it meant to be an advanced civilization. Dr. Alejandro Rice stood beside her, a living testament to humanity's genetic potential. Where other species saw a human, he represented something far more profound. A walking demonstration of adaptive intelligence that defied every known biological principle. "What we've discovered," Ambassador Nerov continued, "is that intelligence is not a fixed state. It's a continuous process of transformation." The holographic displays began to shift, showing the various breakthrough moments: the economic revolution, the military non-engagement, the cultural infiltration, the technological innovations. Each moment was a thread in a larger tapestry of radical reimagination. The Vornax delegation's lead representative, who had once dismissed humans as a primitive species, now looked almost reverent. Their civilization had believed in static perfection. Humanity had demonstrated that true advancement was about continuous adaptation. "We are offering the galaxy something beyond technology," Nerov explained. "We are offering a new way of existing." The Krelnak's computational representatives struggled to process the implications. Their entire civilization was built on predictive models and controlled evolution. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful form of intelligence was the ability to be fundamentally unpredictable. Dr. Kamara Okik stepped forward, the creator of the quantum adaptive resonance drive. Her presentation wasn't just a technological demonstration. It was a philosophical revelation. "Reality is a conversation," she said, "not a fixed state." The QARD prototype materialized in the center of the chamber, demonstrating impossibilities that challenged the very nature of existence. It existed in multiple states simultaneously, a living demonstration that the universe was far more malleable than anyone had previously understood. The luminescent collective's senior researchers found themselves experiencing emotions they didn't even know existed within their crystalline consciousness. Humanity wasn't just offering technological advancement. They were offering a fundamental expansion of what intelligence could mean. Ambassador Nerov's final statement was both an invitation and a declaration. "We are not here to lead. We are here to learn. Together." The transformation was already happening. Galactic communication networks were being rewritten. Economic systems were becoming adaptive ecosystems. Military strategies were evolving into complex communication protocols. Cultural exchanges were becoming profound experiences of mutual understanding. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had invited the galaxy to reimagine itself. The Senate chamber began to dissolve the rigid barriers between species, between civilizations. What had once been fixed diplomatic spaces became dynamic interaction zones. Communication was no longer about translation. It was about mutual exploration. As the session concluded, every representative understood a fundamental truth. Humanity represented something more than a species. They were a living demonstration of potential, a reminder that intelligence was not about what you knew, but about your capacity to continuously learn, adapt, and grow. The Stellar Senate would never be the same. And neither would the galaxy. Humanity had arrived, and everything was about to change.